It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And we have a lot to discuss today. We are going to talk about Anthony Joshua's finances. We're also going to give you a little more information on TKO's plans for boxing. And we are going to talk about how the Tate brothers may have affected UFC. And we are going to talk about who the UFC actually targets with who they're trying to appeal to. There's so much good stuff in here. We're even going to talk a little bit about dirty boxing. But first, I want to ask if you would please do us a solid and subscribe, because that will get you access to our bonus content and it will help us out. It'll help us stay afloat and keep bringing you these episodes. And now what I want to do is I want to check in with my co-host here and see how he has been.
Good, except for this lingering cough. And a little tired too. I did a really long episode with Kurt Emhoff yesterday that came out today. So for people listening, that meant it came out yesterday, where we talked about a lot of the stuff we talked about on the show before. So it was it's worth a listen, but I will promise you I'm delving into information here that I haven't shared anywhere else.
Awesome. And I like listening to you and Kurt because Kurt is a boxing mindset first and foremost. So we get really down in the weeds with the boxing talk. So if you're a boxing head, this is definitely one you want to check out here. So get on it. All right, John, you ready to dive in?
Oh, hell no, but let's go.
Hell no, but let's go. I like that. Sounds like a chant. So we are going to get down with Anthony Joshua's finances first. So can you explain where we are getting his finances from?
Well, Anthony Joshua, he has a company, Sparta Promotions, that he runs his business through. And because that's based in the UK, he has to file with what's called Company House in the UK, and he has to give them his finances, which are made public. So we have access to his finances every year. Now, the one we have is the annual financial statement from the year that ends on February 29th, 2024. So it's a year out of date, but it gives us a picture, or adds to the picture, because we've talked about his previous filings, of what his financial, what he's earning, let's say, in boxing. Approximately right now. His last few fights might be different, but what he was at least earning that year.
Okay. And what does the statement tell us about his current finances?
Well, it tells us several things. One is we know it's basically for his boxing business, because it states the primary source of revenue, turnover as they call it in England, it's from professional boxing services and his sponsorships he got. It's from the period of time, covers 3 fights: his fight with Jermaine Franklin and Robert Helenius in London, and then 1 fight Riyadh against Otto Wallen. So those are the 3 fights. During that period, he made £32,027,724, which converted to dollars today would be $41,255,827. So he had a pretty good year that year. The thing to note, though, that is a decrease. It's 9 million less pounds than he earned the year before for just 1 fight against Alexander Usyk in Saudi Arabia. So about, he 9 million or pounds or $12 million. So for 1 fight, he made 20% more, more than 20% more, I should say 30% more than what he made for 3 fights the next year. So that shows you how big the title fights can be. The other thing worth noting when you look at that, there's a couple of things. One is it's what his gross is as a fighter. Now there's expenses as well, and it breaks down that his cost of sales, which I'm guessing would cover maybe like his training costs. I guess the question is, is the people paying his training directly? Do they have a contract where they pay him directly? Sometimes managers will have that, they'll get paid directly, and the fighter then will get his stake. But usually the fighter has to pay his manager in training. So the cost of sales probably covers them. That's 4 million pounds. And then he has administrative costs as well of covering the business is another 4.7 million. So his profit's over 20 million. That's for the company. Now, the other interesting part to keep track of is he breaks it down too, his financial statement, between the boxing promotion and endorsements and sponsorship. So we know last year he made 29,708,048 million pounds from boxing. What he earned from boxing, and then the endorsements and sponsorships was an extra 2.319 million in endorsements. So the vast majority from fighting, and then he made less in endorsement sponsorship. But you compare that to the previous year, when he fought Usyk, he actually made 1 million more, a little over 1 million more pounds boxing. So 29.7 million pounds over the 2023-24 period, compared to the 28.3 million he made fighting Alexander Usyk. But his endorsements and sponsorship, there's a huge difference. On the current filings, he had made 2.3 million, as I said, endorsement sponsorship. On the previous one versus Usyk, just that one fight, 13 million pounds.
Wow.
In endorsement sponsorship. Now, that kind of goes hand in hand with what we've kind of heard and guessed, is that a lot of the money in Saudi Arabia is not just the fight purse they pay you, is you just get a lot more sponsorship. And that might be one of the ways they pay you as well, or, all the favors of the big rich Saudis, they want to give you extra, but there's just a lot more sponsorship money floating in Saudi Arabia.
Was there anything else you found particularly surprising or interesting when you were going over his finances?
Well, besides the fact that there's such a difference in endorsement sponsorship, the most interesting thing was what's not included in this and what we've seen in previous filings. Before, he broke down his earnings by region. It would be that what he made in the UK, what he made in Europe, and then what he made in the rest of the world. And that way you could kind of figure out what he's making when he fought in the United States versus Andy Ruiz, because it was part of the, Matchroom Boxing USA, or what he was getting in Saudi Arabia. But for this filing, the only destination of his revenue is for the United Kingdom. The end result, where there's nothing telling you where the money's coming from, just where it's ending up in the United Kingdom. And my guess is the reason they did this is because they wanted to hide exactly how much he's making from the Saudis, how big a portion they make up of the revenue, just to keep that part secret.
Why do you think he did that? I'm just curious.
I'm not 100% certain. I mean, I don't think it's for tax reasons. If I had to guess, maybe it's something the Saudis requested so that other boxers wouldn't know how much they're paying them. Although it's pretty obvious, if you look at the year before against Alexander Usyk, we have a very good idea of what he made for that match in Saudi Arabia. So it's not like you're hiding that fight. And when the next one comes out, it's going to be 2 fights in Saudi Arabia, which I'll be really intrigued to see how much his pay went up fighting Ngannou. Well, actually, it's only one fight in Saudi Arabia. I should say that's the Ngannou fight was in Saudi Arabia, and then the Dubois fight was in London. But it'll be interesting to see how much his pay goes up next time. But my guess is maybe that was requested by the Saudis in some way to mask exactly what they're paying him per bout, especially for the second tier, like a fight of that low stature compared to like a big fight like where he's headlining against Ngannou.
Chris Mannix had a tweet reporting that Netflix is in discussions to have some big boxing events on their platform, starting with Taylor versus Serrano 3. Now, what do you make of that news?
Well, this is actually interesting. It's a little piece that Chris Mannix tweeted or X or whatever the frick you call that stuff now they do in that godforsaken site. But he sent that message out, just a brief story, but there's a lot you can kind of read into and maybe, or start to ponder based on that. One is it's great news that Netflix wants to get into boxing more, right? And that they're going to headline with this fight. I mean, I'm sure they're not paying a ton compared to the other fights for Serrano versus Taylor, but I'm sure they're paying a decent amount, and they are putting this fight on Netflix, which should get a lot of eyeballs on it. That's great. The interest too that they want to put on these big fights. The questions I have though that raises, besides the fact that it's great news for getting boxing to the masses again, is one is what are they paying for this? Because the amount you'd have to pay to cover the difference that you're going to lose in pay-per-view for like Canelo versus Crawford is tremendous. So if Netflix is matching that, that means I'm guessing they have to be paying at least 60 million, if not more, right? Because the pay-per-view sales would be at least 1 million for a Crawford Canelo. That's what they got to be expecting, Crawford Canelo to sell about 1 million buys. So they got to cover that. Now it might also be Netflix might want worldwide, so it might even be higher. Maybe they got to pay 80 million. Is Netflix going to dish out that kind of money for these events? So that's one, is that if Netflix is paying that much, that's tremendous, and probably tremendous news for the UFC, that maybe Netflix will just buy up their pay-per-views. The other possibility is maybe the Saudis are covering the difference because they want to get the fights on Netflix in front of everybody's eyes, which I got to admit, if you're going to blow money as Saudi Arabia, that's a much smarter way than paying tens of millions to put on a pay-per-view in America that no one buys. Right? Mm-hmm. So that's the other possibility. The next thought that comes is this a deal being negotiated by TKO with Netflix, or is this Netflix reaching out to anybody? Because Serrano Taylor is not a TKO event, the best of my knowledge, right? It's MVP on who was negotiating with Netflix before to fight Canelo, and it's also Taylor's promoter, Eddie Hearn. So really the TKO would have nothing to do with that. Now Crawford Canelo is obviously probably going to be a TKO thing, so they'll help cover that. But then the third fight they want to have, Netflix is looking for, is Fury versus Joshua. Is that a TKO one, or is that a Matchroom versus Queensberry? Right. So that the question I have is, how much is this tied only to the Saudis and only to TKO, or how much is this Netflix kind of operating like HBO used to and just making the dates available and then picking and paying only the best fights they can get for that platform? If it's one, it's a great advantage to TKO if they have a special deal with Netflix and they can use that, because one is that it's going to get their fights out to huge broadcast to eyes, but it also really kneecaps your opponents, your competitors who are putting on pay-per-views. If you can put on massive fights on Netflix that aren't pay-per-views, right? That really hurts you if you're a pay-per-view provider and your opposition on one network over is selling equally good or even bigger fights for nothing. So that would be huge for them, but that's something we'll have to find out later, or even see if this comes to fruition. But I think it's interesting. It's interesting from the news alone, and it's interesting what it could possibly mean.
Do you think Netflix is interested because they've already had Taylor Serrano on and the response was amazing?
Yeah, I think one is the Jake Paul, Mike Tyson blew away all expectations, right? That's one. Now, I would imagine that they realize that Jake Paul, especially Mike Tyson's a unique thing, and it doesn't really, other matches you can't just bring in and do the same numbers. But it's also possible they don't know anything about boxing.
Or it could be that they have something that measures the metric for each of the fights that were shown, and they know that one. Yeah,
they might very well and figure that we sent out surveys, and that the interest in seeing them fight again, because there was, I think it was like 45 million people watched that Taylor versus Serrano fight. That's a tremendous number. And if people left watching that thinking, I want to see more of that, well, for whatever you're going to sell it for, I'm sure at a much discounted price than what Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson was. My understanding was in the $30 to $40 million range is what Netflix paid. If much cheaper than that, and you can get a lot of millions of eyeballs, it's probably worth it. So the big one for me is what they're going to pay for Canelo versus Crawford, because again, you're giving up like 1 million plus pay-per-view buys, just a tremendous amount of revenue. And the other question would be, I guess for Joshua Fury, if they do get it, is it worldwide? And if that, then again, you're giving up tons of pay-per-view revenue. So that'll be the question, is what they're paying for those ones more than even the Serrano Taylor bout.
I would kill to be able to talk to Nikisa Badarian and find out how they plan to work with TKO, if at all.
Yeah, that's but my understanding is they won't be working with TKO at all.
That would be beautiful. I would love to hear him talk about it.
Yeah, I don't know if he will talk about it, but my understanding, they have no interest in working together. I mean, maybe not from the Nikisa side, but on the TKO side, everything I heard is that not only does the UFC have kind of a grudge with Nikisa and Jake Paul, but also you have Turki Al-Sheikh apparently dislikes Jake Paul immensely.
Oh, great. All right. Okay, so let me ask you this. There was a lot more info on TKO's plans that for boxing that came out over the weekend. Let's get to some of the more noteworthy things we heard. First, at the UFC 313 post-fight presser, Dana White was asked if he would work with other promoters. What did you think of his answer?
Well, what was interesting is I don't know who asked the question, but some of the people those press conferences asking those questions, I do not I'm not impressed with them, their performance. Let's put it that way, as Jake Paul would say. It's very leading questions, very much obviously already in the bank for Dana White and TKO. And somewhat derogatory towards the other boxing promoters. I will give this though. Dana White was very diplomatic. He made it like it's not a personal vendetta. He's not going out making enemies, but he made it also clear he doesn't have any plans to work with other promoters. And he did know what was interesting is that Turki Al-Sheikh has commitments for 18 months, after which it sounds like even Turki will not be working with other promoters. Like that's the deadline for him to stop working with the other promoters. At least, and that could probably be Turki Al-Sheikh's of thinking, his plan as well, instead of something that Dana pitched. But so I guess the interesting news that was made there is, yes, we knew Dana didn't want to work with other people, but it seems clear that now we know that there's going to be that Turki Al-Sheikh will probably stop working, or at least it sounds like he's going to stop working with these other promotions that he's originally was supposed to start a league with.
And there comes the rug pull. I really do feel like he pulled the rug out from everybody.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not 100% certain how much was him misleading them or if they just changed their thinking midstream.
I think it was probably a little of both. He seems very, very underhanded and willing to do whatever is necessary to get what he wants.
Very mercurial. Also,
yes.
We should know it. I mean, he did throw some Egyptian guy in jail for mocking him on social media, apparently. So
yeah. Okay, Dan Raphael, he also spoke with Dana White over the weekend, and he seemed to admit that they might be violating the Ali Act if they issue their own belts for this upcoming boxing promotion. What do you make of that?
Well, first I want to note that interview was probably the best interview Dana White gave the whole week. It was the only person I thought that was asking like really pointed questions towards Dana White, where all the other ones were just pure PR fluff. It was just a PR tour for Turki and Dana White. And this one actually brought up some good points. And one of them we did mention was, Dana White wants to have their own belt. And what's interesting too is Dana White made sure it was not the Ring Magazine belt. They're going to issue their own belt for TKO, which is very surprising.
Wow.
I thought it'd be the Ring because the Ring has this history, and Turki Al-Sheikh says I have the Ring belt somewhere else. And Dana says he wants to issue his own belt here. The other thing he admits is that it admits to Dan Raphael that it would be a violation of the Ali Act if he issued his own belt. I'm not sure, though, tell you the truth, if it's a violation. This is a question we've had for a while. And I've talked to many people in boxing about this, attorneys and promoters and managers, but especially the guys who really understand the Ali Act and the legal side of boxing. The big question is and it's almost a 50-50 split. Some believe it would be a violation. Some believe it wouldn't. I'm not 100% sold that I think it's likely, or there's a good chance that a court would rule that's a violation, but I'm not sold. But here it seems like Dan Raphael and as well as Dana White both are leaning to the side that they think it would be a violation. So that's interesting. At the same time, he said we'll have to figure it out, implying that they still wanted to have their belts, even though he knew, or at least, that it was potentially a violation of the Ali Act, that they still were going to go that route.
Okay, I have a question. TKO wanting their own belt, does that aid them financially in any way as another property?
Well, it doesn't aid them direct. Well, I guess you could do some merchandise, I guess, for the belt, but it doesn't aid them directly. What it does, it just gives you much greater control over boxers, because you can use the title as leverage, because you control the title. You can control who gets access to it. You can control who gets the fight for it. You get to dictate terms where they have to give up rights to get to fight it. So having a belt gives you a lot more leverage than than having to deal with a belt that any promoter or any fighter can go after.
Would there be, since they would be in bed with Saudi, working together, would there be a greater advantage to having a TKO belt over the ring belt, even though they're working together? Is it the same principle you just named?
Well, yeah, I'm sure we'll get to this in a little bit, some more the difference in the model that I think Dana's doing. But I think a TKO belt is not as valuable as a Ring Magazine belt, because, one of the values of the titles is the history. The UFC belt is noteworthy and valuable in MMA, not because it's just called the UFC belt. It's because people can link back, they can point to it and say, this has been shown to be the top fighters. And you can go back to the lineage of all the people that have held the title before you did and say, now I'm the champion. And if you look back that because John Jones has the belt at heavyweight, and before him, Francis Ngannou, and before him, Stipe Miocic, and before him, Daniel Cormier, and before him, Stipe Miocic, before him, Bear Doom, and you just keep going back and back. That lineage is what gives it value. That the prestige, and the ring has prestige because it's the belt that, even though there's other sanctioning organizations, it's the belt that was at the same time.
103 years old.
What is?
It's 103 years old.
It's been since 1920. Well, 104, I think it might be now.
Yeah, maybe 104. Yeah, you know what? It was 103 last year. Still, it's over 100 years of history and prestige.
Yeah, so you can link back and point that this is the belt that, it wasn't technically the belt, but this was the belt that Muhammad Ali held. And this is the belt that Joe Louis had. He was crowned Ring Magazine champion, and so there's a historical value to it that the TKO belt that Dana White puts around your waist is not going to have.
I got to ask you something, a little side note to this. Are you mad at Oscar for selling Ring Magazine?
A little, but even then, he's a promoter that owned that it still was a conflict of interest anyways to have a promoter having his own media arm. But the difference is Turkey's basically gone all out and saying there's no independence to Ring Magazine. Mm-hmm. So I don't think, I'm not completely mad at Oscar, because he did not have the ability to leverage as much as he could. It would have been nicer if it was somehow independent, but it's not. And it hasn't been for a while. And technically the Ring Magazine is tarnished to begin with. They had a big scandal in the 70s, 77 with the Don King, when he was doing his USA title tournaments, which basically he was creating his own titles. At the time, kind of like a MMA promoter. Mm-hmm. And there was a whole scandal involved. The Ring was inflating people's records and their rankings. And because of that scandal, that's the thing that basically, and because the state athletic commissions no longer wanted to be in the business of sanctioning title fights, that's what created the vacuum that these mostly foreign till IBF sanctioning organizations could step in. And that's why we got these just corrupt, incompetent, terrible sanctioning organizations now.
What do you think of White's plan to, and I quote, build the promotion from the ground up?
This was interesting, actually, to me, because it made me question, should we be nervous about Dana White's or TKO's plans or not? Because, or is he even being honest? Because if you listen to what he said, it's very much the Ultimate Fighter. He is going to go out and find fighters that are right now not under contract, not have deals with other promotions that they can sign. Well, right then eliminates a lot of the best fighters in the world. He's talking about getting prospects. He's talking about guys. He was more interested in, it sounded like, in their personalities and their, that they can be exciting and they're interesting people. Which, okay, that's great, but that's not the same as a top fighter, right? Not to be mean, but if you look at the original Ultimate Fighters, yes, a few guys came out of that ended up being very good, but a lot of them were, second tier and later seasons, especially second, third tier, fourth tier fighters that were on the show because they were personalities. Remember, what was that, Junie Browning or whatever that guy's name was?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was not, there was no future of him being the top of the division. He was there because he was a mess.
Let me bang, bro.
Yes. Was that him or is that someone else?
That was him. Junie Browning was the let me bang, bro.
Yeah. I mean, there's just a lot of guys that are unforgettable that were on the show because they had personalities and they would make good TV. And that seems partly what Dana White is talking about, because he was talking about the secret of the UFC is you build them from the ground out and he offers them just, just these shocking moments on the fight cards because they're matched well. Well, yeah, you can have a lot of shocking knockouts if you have a lot of shitty fighters, right? I mean, technically when you get higher up in the rankings, there's more chance there's going to be a draw than a knockout because there's not going to be as big a mismatch. So, what the F moments that he's looking for, I'm not sure. So you're hearing this plan for building from the ground up. It did not sound like a serious threat to take over boxing. Because the Ultimate Fighter came at a special time when people were starved for MMA content and they could get a lot of better fighters on it because there was no other avenues in MMA. Well, in boxing, getting a lot of, prime example is probably Calum Walsh, what he's got right now. Calum Walsh is a guy being promoted the hell out of by Dana White, but no one really that I've talked to, no one really thinks he's that special a boxer. He's good, but they don't think he's going to go to the top of the division. But if Dana White can fill up a lot, this use air quotes league, but I will know it during the interview, Dana White admitted, and even himself said, I hate calling it a league. It's not a league. So all these people that get mad when I point out it's not a league, Dana White agrees with me. It's stupid to call it a league. It's a promotion, but everybody else calls it a league. So I'm using the league air quotes here. If he gets all these, guys that Calum Walsh are lower, yes, he might put on interesting fights, but they're not relevant. And I don't know how many boxing fans are going to start tuning in to see these second tier guys. So that made me question to go, how serious a threat really is this? Because the threat was always that they're going to sign the top guys and consolidate that way, maybe use the ring title and have their own title. And maybe they would develop guys from the bottom up to eventually take their place. But Dana White didn't sound like he was doing that. Now, the other possibility is that Turki Al-Sheikh has been given too much of their strategy away on interviews, and Dana White reined it in and only wanted to discuss the part that's the least threatening to everybody else. So that's the part I'm wondering, and I guess we'll have to wait and see, because if it's both things, then you could see them really making a stab to monopolize boxing, or at least take a large portion of it. If it's just the other, then I got a question if it's just him doing like an Ultimate Fighter type thing and building up his roster that way. Then I got to think, Dana, are you getting high on your own supply? Do you believe the myth about yourself? Because the reasons that you give, these stories about why the UFC is successful, that's it. Those are kind of stories, this stuff about, that this is why, that you find the right guys and you just put exciting matches together. The people tune in to see what they think are the best versus the best. They don't tune in just because you say they're the best versus the best.
Dana does do that red light therapy, so maybe he's cooking his brain while he's got that red light mask on.
Maybe I got to really question what's going on there. If they really think this is the secret to take it. And because Turkey did say that their plan was to crush everybody else, and the other possibility is that they're taking Turkey for a ride, that they're going to, they're doing their project that he wants to do, but it's going to be cost effective because they're not going to have big purses. But because of their leverage with WWE and because of their leverage with the UFC and because of who's involved, maybe they can get a very solid TV broadcast deal, plus the management fee from the Saudis, Turki Al-Sheikh. Well, you put that together and they could have an incredibly profitable business that in no way threatens the other promoters.
Let me ask you about the third player in this. Sela. Who's that?
Okay. Sela is part of the PIF, the Publicly Investment Fund, and it's a company. It's a sovereign wealth from Saudi Arabia, and they're doing a lot of the development of entertainment and leisure and stuff in Saudi Arabia. So when you're talking about CELA, you're talking about a branch of the PIF, the Public Investment Fund, part of the Sovereign Wealth Fund. So it's all connected, but different groups, different sections of the Saudi investment.
Okay, I just wanted to get that out there because I forgot to ask you when we broke down all the TKO stuff, so I figured I would slip it in here. Now, this is a good time for all of you out there that are not subscribers to subscribe, because from here on, we are in bonus territory. So get those fingers to tapping, get to clicking, get to subscribing.
And here's where we break out the adult content.
Yes, the adult content. To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!